Joining me now is someone who was very instrumental in the passage of the budget. John DeFrancisco chairs the Senate Finance Committee, and he is joining us tonight in the studio. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah, you look actually rested. How did you achieve that?
Well, I go to bed early when I can, and I get up late if I have to. So no, it was the staffs were the ones who really had the great burden. They were working all through the night, almost every night. So no, I can handle it. There's no problem.
Yeah, and the Senate actually finished before midnight.
We did.
Had it not been for, I mean, look, there was a lot of waiting around, a lot of printing of bills, a lot of waiting for the education runs. I mean, do you think anything else could have been done to have hit that early mark?
Well, I think the bill printing really slowed everything up, and everyone wanted to make sure that they read the prints of all the changes that were made from print to print. So people are being careful not to make some glaring errors. So I think it's being on time, I think, is important, and being I think, a good budget under very, very difficult circumstances is what's important.
You know, there's been some criticism from good government groups, for example, what's the rush? In other words, you needed the messages of necessity. The governor was clearly interested in getting an on-time budget, but he also said at the same time, well, good is better than early, good is better than on time. You just said you thought the budget was good, I understand, but did you really need those messages? I mean, would it have killed everybody to go one day late?
Well, you know, obviously it was important to the governor that he had an early budget, or at least an on-time budget, and you know, we were trying to cooperate as best we could, and you know, what more do you need? I mean, the governor's budget was out since January. All that was really had to be reviewed carefully were the changes that were taking place over time, and those changes came from the two one House bills. So, you know, I don't think anyone was denied the opportunity to review anything that would have changed their mind. I think if you're going to be against the budget, you're going to be against the budget. If you're going to be for it, you're going to be for it, even if you had another day in the process. So I don't think that's legitimate criticism.
And what about, one of the changes actually was, instead of 3,500 beds, and this is a big issue for you guys in the Senate Republicans, we're looking at 3,700 beds, closing prison beds. Big issue. And instead of a framework, and I spoke actually to Senator Nozzoli about this, that there were going to be criteria for setting up a framework for how people were going to be inputting it, and it was going to be a commission or whatever. Now it's just, well, we're going to leave it up to the governor and trust that he's going to do the right thing with input from the legislature, I understand. There, again, some criticism, notably from example from the New York Post, suggested that the Republicans folded on this particular issue.
Well, you know, first of all, the governor publicly, when the agreement was announced, mentioned at least 2 or 3 times that he was going to consult with the legislature, and it was going to be geographically fair. What irked the Republicans in the last couple of years, that every prison closing was in a Republican district.
Sure.
So if he's giving his word and he's doing it publicly, and secondly, we added the funds for economic development tax credits, as well as some capital money, to try to encourage businesses to come into those areas. So that was a huge part of what the Republicans wanted to have in there. And if you got to take the governor for his word, at least on part of what he says, and if he says it publicly, I think he's going to do it.
Well, but the thing is, and look, we don't expect that the governor isn't going to keep his word, and there's no reason to expect that he won't. He's been in office for 3 months now, and he's done pretty much exactly what he said he's going to do. Whether you like it or not, he's been pretty consistent. The thing is, if he doesn't, for some reason, and he unilaterally makes decisions, there's nothing you can do now. I mean, you guys have signed away that power.
There's a lot you can do, because this is not his only year in office. You know, the idea of how we got to where we got was based on trust in many, many different areas. And it seems to me that it worked out extremely well for the governor and for the Senate majority by trusting each other. And if that trust is broken, you know, there's going to be real problems in future years or on future issues, because this isn't the be-all and the end-all of every issue that we'll have to deal on. So I feel comfortable based upon the assurances as well as the Economic Development Fund.
Well, and to that point, actually, going forward into, look, it's true, 3 months. The man's been here 3 months. He's got 4 years. And there are, and not even after the budget, you're going to have property tax cap, you're going to have rent control, you're going to have pension reform, ethics reform, redistricting. I'm not so sure that you guys are going to bring that back up. I don't think the majority leader has any interest in doing that. But going forward into next year's budget for a moment, before we return to all of that, the Speaker has suggested we haven't tested this extender power. I mean, let's be honest, the legislature wouldn't have moved as fast as it had
I agree with you, and there's a problem with it, and I'll be candid to admit it. If you've got a policy issue that has nothing to do with the budget, and I'll give the example, Medicaid caps, or not Medicaid caps, medical malpractice caps on pain and suffering. You know, that had literally very little to do with the budget.
Well, it's a trading chit.
And that's my point, that it depends on what those trading chits become. At some point, the trading chits might not be palatable to one side or the other, and then that may get extended. I hope that never happens, and I hope it never happens by us and the governor not putting all of these ancillary issues into the budget and making sure that there's going to be problems or contentious arguments or delays. And I think by not putting rent control in, by not putting some of the other issues that people were crying to have in, it gave us the opportunity to talk about budget matters almost exclusively, except for a few issues.
Yeah, but also, I mean, had he not been able to threaten you guys with this possibility of shoving his entire budget with those policy points in it that not everybody liked into the budget and making you, had you blown the April 1st deadline, and making you choose between a government shutdown, which is enormously unpopular, and accepting everything that he wanted, as is the way Governor Patterson had done to a certain extent, the things that had not been agreed to last year, he put in and you had to accept it. If he had done that, being able to hang that over your heads is an enormous threat.
Well, first of all, the threat didn't make much difference to me. I think this year the threat was clearly aimed at the Speaker with the medical, with the caps on pain and suffering and medical malpractice cases. And my point is, next year that threat may be on an issue that is important to the Senate Republicans.
Sure. So what do you do about it?
What do you do? I think this is the first budget with this governor. Hopefully he understands that we need cooperation as well, and hopefully some of those issues will be separate issues, and that we'll work together on a budget. And I think we've had more trust built up in 3 months than we had in the last I don't know how many years. So I think we got to watch how this plays out. And I just hope we don't tie too many things into the budget process, because will break down eventually.
Well, but also, I mean, you're not always going to have this governor. I mean, people are talking now about him going to the White House and all sorts of things, but sooner or later the guy's not going to be governor. Someone else will be governor. And you don't know going down the pike how that relationship and negotiations might go. I mean, would you leave open the door to possibly legal challenges of this budget extender method that's been employed now by 2 separate governors?
Of course, you can never say never to anything. And I think that eventually it will be challenged, because eventually one side or the other is going to say, well, this is too much, and we're going to have to go into court to find how we can deal with it. And I think eventually it's going to happen. But I think the best way to do it is to avoid it and try to, hopefully the governor will understand that there's a better way to do it, and there'll be the ability to work on budget issues only in budgets.
Another thing that's in that budget that we don't know about yet, and we will in the next, I don't know, week or so, is workforce savings. Has the governor given any indication to the Senate about negotiations with the CSEA and PEF, and will he be able to achieve that workforce savings, or will he be laying people off?
There's been no discussions that I'm aware of, but I really believe that his goal is to try to work out an agreement so there won't have to be layoffs, or there'll be minimal layoffs. And I would hope that the union leadership feels the same way, because the layoffs can be avoided, I think, and I think that's what the governor wants to do. But he hasn't given me any indication.
Because it would leave a big hole in the budget. It's some up to $500 million.
That's correct,
right.
And that's why I say there's a reason for everybody to act reasonably on both sides of that issue, and hopefully he'll use his skills to create an atmosphere where there's a good settlement of all those contracts.
Now, before we look ahead, which I'd like to do in a second, I just want to touch briefly on last night and the protests that occurred. I mean, there were areas of the Capitol that were locked down, that were not accessible, I guess for safety's sake. And I assume, I mean, did you feel threatened at any moment, or that you were in danger in some way?
No, I didn't feel threatened. There were quite a few protesters. I'm on the 4th floor of the Capitol, and that whole 4th floor area above the chambers was body to body. I was able clearly to walk through whenever I wanted to walk through. No one gave me a problem, nor did I give
Did they
anybody a problem.
recognize you, though?
Well, I had a suit on, and I've been on your show a couple of times.
Yeah, that's
Everybody
true.
watches your show. I would hope that they
Thank you.
recognize me. But no, there was no problem. But there had to be some confinement of where they were going to be, or we never would have gotten anything done. If they're screaming in the chambers and not wanting to get out of the chambers, there would have been hours of delays if we could even, if the police were even willing to risk arresting that many people.
Yeah. So, but you felt not that anyone was particularly dangerous in that moment.
No, in fact, it was more dangerous during the coup period when there were people that were pushing and shoving and trying to block our entrance into the chambers, and that's what was being avoided on this occasion.
So now, looking forward, if you wouldn't mind, I mean, your Senator Libous actually this morning was talking about he thinks pension reform is going to be one of the main points of focus, but also obviously ethics reform is a big thing for the governor. I mean, what is going to be taken up first?
Well, I think the thing that's got to be taken up first in my mind is the mandate relief for counties and the cities and the municipalities. There was nothing in the budget of any importance, and if we're really going to try to put a property tax cap or ask counties to tighten their budgets, you can't ask them to do that without some real relief, not just tinkering around the edges. That, I would hope, would be on that list, including the areas that you talked about. And
actually, to the property tax cap, I mean, the Long Island guys now are suggesting that perhaps there will not be a property tax cap in this session, specifically for that reason. I mean, look, let's be honest, that mandate relief that you're asking for is hard. Hard stuff. Real mandate relief, the Triborough Amendment, those kind of things, nobody wants to touch that.
Reform,
sure,
right, same
sure.
type of thing. That's correct, but up to this point, we've got to have the will of the Assembly as well, and there hasn't been any indication that they're interested in any shape, manner, or form of a property tax cap.
Well, now perhaps we'll see some real horse trading again, because there are that whole list that I mentioned, and who knows what else will be popping up in Albany, because it's Albany. And I want to thank you very much for coming by. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Yeah, but Albany looks better today than it did last year and yesterday.
Okay, it looks pretty good.
Thank you.
Looks pretty good. Senator John DeFrancisco, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.